Welcome to the Thor Hour. I'm your host, John Thorhauer. Join me in conversations as I learn from experts, enthusiasts, artisans, and other folks as we consider the human experience. Grab an episode or two and explore the talents, passions, and curiosities from Frederick, Maryland, and beyond. If you enjoy these conversations and want to help me out, please like, subscribe, and even share with your friends. Today I'm talking with Jared Bendy. Jared is a United States Capitol Police officer. Jared is also a friend. This is a conversation about the human side of January 6th. We step away from the politics and talk about what it means to Jared to be a police officer who's also a father, a coworker, a husband, a human who experienced the events of a day that is now part of the history of this great country. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Jared Bendy. Jared, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very happy to be able to have you on, and I think it's a topic a lot of people will be interested in. Turned out being pretty timely. I think when you and I first started talking about maybe doing an interview, of course, had no idea that all the events would be kind of swirling around that are right now with the hearings and things like that. But certainly something that is of interest to people, and you're someone, being a Capitol Hill police officer. I thought it would be just a great opportunity for people to hear just from a personal story standpoint, and somebody who's been a police officer there for quite a while, your experiences over time, including of course January 6th, but other things as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I guess we should just start back, because I think it would be helpful to hear just broadly how did you get into policing?
Yeah. So I started off, I was in school for sociology at George Mason, and graduated. Wasn't really sure what exactly I wanted to do. Moved up to Maryland and started in the nonprofit field, working with people with disabilities. And then kind of was looking for a career transition. And I was going to go back to grad school or kind of change professions. And law enforcement was a possibility, and provided more like sound financial, monetarily.
Right.
And so versus going back to school full time, my son was just being born. And so I went the route of law enforcement, and it's kind of been just keep moving forward since then.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Starting in, graduating sociology.
Yeah.
Right. And helping people with disabilities.
Yep. Yeah.
So, interesting.
Yeah. So I did that for about 2.5, 3 years out before I started with Capitol Police.
Okay. So you started off at Capitol Police Department. Is that what it's called? Department? Police Force?
Capitol Police. Yeah. We just go United States Capitol Police.
United States
is what
Capitol
it's
Police.
The official name.
So you started there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 25. Started there. Some people start earlier, right out of college. I had one of my classmates. He was finishing college, and then as soon as he graduated, he rolled right into academy at 21.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you can start early. You can start later. You can start. The latest is 37.
Okay. So you were 25.
25.
All right. How many years you been doing it now?
I will finish my 8th year in September.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I tried to do just a little bit of research to understand a little bit more about the Capitol Police, and I was surprised. Like, there's about 1,800 officers, and so that there's a lot of officers. What are the different kinds of things that a Capitol Hill police officer would do?
Yeah. So on a day-to-day, it's very stationary for the uniformed. So we have different sections, divisions, and different breakdowns. And so a regular day for most of us in the uniform division are working at a post, whether that's screening cars that are coming in to accessing the perimeter, inner perimeter, screening at a door to allow guests to enter, staffers to enter, any particular VIPs that we have coming in that day. We're helping with all of that throughout the Capitol Hill campus. So we have Senate office buildings, House office buildings, the Capitol building itself, and then the Library of Congress. And we secure all
It's
those.
a lot of property.
Yeah, so we
secure
secure
all
all
those. It's a lot of space, right? That's not a small footprint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then all three of the library, the Senate, and the House all have 3 buildings associated with them.
Okay.
So there's 3 Library of Congress buildings, 3 Senate buildings, 3 House buildings.
Right.
Yeah.
And you mentioned VIPs. like, isn't almost everybody a VIP, or is there like VIPs of VIPs?
VIP,
or does everybody think they're a VIP?
Everyone thinks they're a VIP, right? Yeah, I mean, there's levels to it, but we have everyone from heads of state down to, if you want to call celebrities, low end, but heads of state from foreign countries that are coming to visit, senators to talk about different issues, to celebrities that are coming through, military, generals, admirals.
Right. So those would all be in that category.
Yeah, I guess the way we distinguish VIPs for us is if someone that is securing them is armed. That's a kind of a difference versus just a regular person without armed escort or private security. Those are kind of different protocols for those two things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So what would you say, you've been there for a while, so you could give us some insight with this, what would you say is unique about, so there's being a police officer and I'm sure being like, Chicago PD, is different than being Frederick, police officer in certain ways, in a lot of ways. And then, I would think being Capitol Hill police Capitol Police is another, like a unique set to its own.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, what would you say is like really distinct about it and different?
Yeah, I think one, you're a part of history every day there, which I think is very interesting and kind of something I try to tell people for good or for bad. But I think the thing that's unique about it is you could be talking to like a head of state, and then literally the next moment you're talking to a homeless person outside. So you're talking to someone at the highest level, and then now going down to the lowest level, which is very distinct, I think, from other, even like within D.C., there's multiple agencies within D.C., but you have Metropolitan, which is one of the larger police forces, Capitol Police, and then Park Police. Those three have very different jobs and very different interactions within the city itself. And those are probably the three biggest agencies that I would say. And, the Capitol Hill, for me, that's the biggest thing. You have to be able to talk to a senator and a staffer and address them in a certain way, and then step right outside and then talk to a homeless person and address them in a certain way.
Right. So pretty big pivots.
Yes. Yeah. And you have to be able to, your speech has to change, your demeanor has to change.
Yeah, exactly.
All that stuff. And so you're not just going to domestic calls or to break up a party. So you kind of have to handle yourself in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, and even outside of that, right? I mean, set aside January 6th stuff for a minute. We'll get to that. But even setting aside those kinds of things, right? So you have your VIPs that you talked about. You have the congressman, that you're dealing with day in and day out. That's another unique set of people with certain expectations, and you have to understand how to interact with them with probably protocols there. And then, like you said, there might be a homeless person out on the property somewhere that you have to think through. And then you have people like me, tourists, right, coming and interacting with all sorts of different reasons why we're there. Like, some of us are enjoying it. Some of us have something to say. We want something to hear, somebody to hear or whatever. Like, and that, I mean, these are all very probably different circumstances to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even right now, you have a lot of protesting going on for the abortion rights.
Right.
And so you have to be able to talk to, pro-abortion and anti-abortion, or pro-choice, I guess would be the correct term.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to talk to both of them and stand in between them and be able to handle yourself in that way.
Right.
Which is a whole different world too. You're literally protecting them from themselves sometimes. But you have tourists, you have lobbyists, you have people that are there for fun. You're running the spectrum.
So, my line of work is computer programming. So I'm thinking, like, if we're saying, like, I'd say what we're describing here would be people skills. And so if I look at computer programming, people skills might be like down here, and your people skills in comparison are like, pretty high, right?
Yeah, it's those soft skills that we really have to use every day.
Yeah.
Now we do have hard skills and weapons and the law and things like that, but it's a lot of soft skills because ideally we never have to use anything on our belt. That's the goal at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I would say, I don't want to speak for any police officer, but I'd say most of us would probably, if we could solve it verbally, let's do that.
That's a success.
That's a success. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously with those different people groups, there's going to be different expectations. But even outside of dealing with the different people groups and having to be able to navigate that, as a police officer, would you say your experience, like, are there unique expectations being where you're at, doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I think that Capitol Hill is polished and pressed and clean, and that's kind of the image of Capitol Hill. Okay. And I saw that's kind of the image that Capitol Police, is wanting to portray as well. Yeah. And our everything from our uniforms to our look, all of that.
Was that a learning process for you, or were you like from day one? You're like, I got this.
Well, I guess when you're in academy, that's how they prep you for that, and that's
so the academy is specific to Capitol Police.
Yeah. So we do 3 months in Georgia at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, where any federal agency is more than likely going to spend some time down there. Yeah. And then we have our own separate academy up here. Where it's just more familiarity, more Capitol Police specific. Yeah. But everything's intense in academy when you're learning. Mm-hmm. You can't mess up too much, else you're kicked out. Right. And so there's different expectations there. And then when you get out, you kind of have this on the job training portion. We call it FTO, PTO, like field training. Okay. And so that's for, I think it depends, but that's for a certain amount of time, and then you're kind of on your own. And then you learn how things really go in the field, right? Like,
so during that training time, are you kind of paired up with somebody?
Yeah, you're paired up with an experienced officer. Okay. They go through training to how to handle a new recruit. So when you're in an academy, there's a thing called discretion that you're allowed to. Okay, so but that doesn't exist in academy, but that exists in the real world for senior officers. Yeah. So an example would be hey, it could be a building regulation that you've violated that I could cite you for or arrest you for, but instead we'll figure out a different solution to. Okay.
So there's wisdom that needs to be applied.
Yeah, and the legal term is discretion.
And so is that part of, like, when you're working with somebody, you're shadowing, you're learning, kind of seeing how they use that discretion?
Yeah. Now there are times you can't use that. Okay. Legal times where, hey, I have to arrest you at this point. There are times where, okay, I could let you go. Things like that, or cite you for a different charge or different things. And those are things that, hey, that depends on your reaction. If once I come talk to you, your reaction could dictate how this goes.
So it matters. It matters how I react to you.
Normally, yeah. I mean, oftentimes we see, or myself, I've seen in videos from different police encounters for different people, and I could say, okay, hey, I could see how this is going to go. Yeah. No, I don't know that officer in the video, but I could see maybe how this is going to, he's just going to write you, a warning ticket, and then you maybe give him attitude, and now a ticket, things like that can change.
Yeah. I don't know. You're making me think of a Breaking Bad episode where, what's his White, where he goes off on an officer, and next thing you know, he's in the jail cell. He got sprayed in the face.
Exactly.
With mace. He definitely cranked it up a few notches. He did not do what you would recommend.
Exactly.
Walter White.
Yeah, Walter. Exactly.
Walter White, just like he was just irate that this dude pulled him over, and he went off, and you could see it coming. Yeah. But he did the opposite of what you should do.
Exactly.
He pretty much forced the hand of that officer at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I also probably just say, here's a warning. Yeah. You tear lights out. Okay. All right. Well,
that's not going to work out so well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would be something, about your job that people might be surprised to learn that comes with the job?
I think for me, the biggest thing that I enjoy about it is, like I said, being a part of history every day. Yeah. I've been a part of some really cool events.
Like what?
For me, one thing I always mention to people, like the Larry Nassar, the USA Gymnastics. Mm-hmm. I was in like one of the first hearings in that. When they first heard it on the Senate side. Right when that stuff started, before it was kind of all public. I'm sure it was within that community public and well known, but I guess in the general public it was not. But they had a hearing in Capitol Hill, and I was posted to observe it and monitor it. And I just started to learn, and then started to come out in the news and really pick up steam. I was there when the Pope visited, things like that. So for me, it's just being part of some really cool events, meeting different generals and admirals, and I really enjoy seeing the media's interaction with people, whether that's
what has that made you think, as far as, like, do you feel like like the curtain got pulled back a little?
Oh, very much so.
What okay,
Very
tell me
much.
about
I mean,
that.
you
Like,
just
what does
see
that
it-
mean?
I've literally seen a question posed like at a press conference
Right.
live, and then I've seen it on television.
Okay.
And they don't always match up. Sometimes they do, but they don't always match up.
Oh, really?
Just the way it's phrased, or,
Yeah.
or just different things. And so, yeah, we definitely get to see a peek behind the curtains of the
Yeah.
media's interaction with the press.
Yeah.
Or that's media with but the politicians interacting with the press,
Okay, right.
and their relationships with them,
Yeah.
and just their relationship with us.
Yeah.
Sometimes they try to get information out of us.
Sure.
Why is this person locked up? What's the charge? Just
Right.
different things like that. We're like, okay, I don't know.
Right.
I can't tell you.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. But yeah, you definitely do get to see the media and press at work. And they have people to kind of regulate them. We help that a little bit too, but they have people with the sergeant at arms that help to monitor them.
Yeah. So that's a little bit eye-opening. Yeah.
Yeah, and having to interact with the press too of, hey, you can't be here right now. Oh, freedom of press. Well, this is, whether it's a crime scene or
Right.
whatever, just
Yeah.
kind of having to establish boundaries with that, and also learn there's always a microphone on.
Right. Yeah.
Things that you have to be aware of. I think that maybe street cops don't necessarily have to deal with as much, but
Right.
yeah, you never know when a microphone's on, a camera's on, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess also thinking about, you're talking about, VIPs, there's also like friends of VIPs or whatever, and you never know who you're talking to exactly. Right?
Yeah.
So-
Especially, foreign people that come in, they're not always given the same, treatment as maybe a U.S. person. And so maybe as someone that could be a bodyguard or might not be armed or might be normally armed, they
Right.
might be unarmed with us.
Right.
But, and that could dictate the way we interact with them too. And
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of the respect level that they're given.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Is there for you touched on this a little bit, but would you say there's a typical day at work, or is it, every day is different and that's what's typical about it?
Yeah, I was going to say, every day is different.
Yeah.
Now I tell people this: Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are normally work days. And so those are longer. There's more things happening. Those
Okay.
are the busy days.
For the Congress members.
For the members.
Yeah.
So that's when most of your hearings are going to be held. All the staff members are going to be there. The senators and congressmen are all going to be there. Normally sessions of Congress are run during that time. So, yeah, those are the busy days. But there's not like a typical day. But we can normally expect Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday kind of be our busy days.
And then if you have like events, like big whatever it was, a protest or a march or whatever, is that kind of just by its nature not typical just because it's a big event with a lot of people?
Yeah, well, I think that's the difference too with us at Capitol Police is that we deal with those all the time.
Right.
Not all the time, but more often.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, all the concerts, July 4th, Memorial Day, we got inauguration, State of the Union.
Those are all like
Those are-
very large
Yeah.
groups of people.
Yeah. We're talking,
Right.
hundreds, thousands of people.
Right.
Very important people. So we're more used to working those events and know how to handle that size of group more. Yeah.
Is there a certain, I don't know, I'm sure you have verbiage for this, but like protocols that go into place just because of the size of an event?
We have more people there,
Yeah.
officers there to help assist whatever it is, whether it's a concert, whether it's State of the Union. We definitely have our staffing levels up, and to help with a variety of needs that may arise during that night, or most of that's all done prior to with all the planning and stuff that's done.
Right.
They normally have all the posts assigned and who's assigned to where, and all that stuff's done for us at a higher level.
Yeah. But you guys, do you have like training for large events where you like go through specific training so you know how to handle certain situations when they come up, or how does that work?
Well, so I guess a large event versus a disturbance are two separate things.
Okay.
And so we have like a protest training.
Yep.
We call it civil disturbance, civil disobedience.
Yeah.
That's separate than just dealing with a large crowd.
Okay.
And so, that's the civil disobedience. Some people call it like riot gear, hard gear.
Yeah.
It has a different words, but that's separate training. That's a separate demand on you. than what just like a July 4th concert would be.
Right.
Where, so far there hasn't been an instance during that concert. And so it's just managing a large crowd and getting in the right spot, making sure everything's screened safely.
Yeah.
Now, a destructive protest, whatever side it's on, that has to be handled differently. You have to get the crowd under control. You have to find out the agitators, those sorts of things, whether you need to deploy certain weapons, systems, those sorts of things. And so, those, I'd almost mark them as two separate categories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. So, that obviously kind of leads into, talking about big crowds and disturbances and things like that. The January 6th events. But before we get to January 6th, I'm just curious, with what happened on that day, like for you on the ground, kind of like day in, day out, days kind of leading up to that. Did you have any sense that, not maybe to the scale of things that happened, but just that there was going to be an event, there was going to be a thing, and it could be a problem? Yeah. How would you describe the days kind of leading up to it?
Yeah, so we were on like staggered days off. So we were doing weeks off at a time because it was COVID.
Okay, right.
And so they were giving us weeks off at a time to give a separation and things like that from each other. And so my group was actually off during that time period, and they called us in for that day. And then, so there was some chatter, obviously, why are we being called in, all those sorts of things. And so there was a little bit of chatter, but not a lot. But it was different, coming into work that day, just not knowing what to expect. Because oftentimes, we get intelligence about demonstrations, and then sometimes it's nothing, sometimes it's something. And so you kind of never know what to expect once you show up.
Yeah. Okay. So there wasn't like a special sense of like beyond other events, kind of leading up to that day.
No.
For you?
No, I mean, not for me.
Yeah.
I just was going into work that day, just like any other day.
Yeah. So you were working kind of normal kind of hours with your COVID hours. I guess, they were changing a little bit.
Yeah. We were just expecting to work that day, go home, and have the rest of the week off.
Yeah.
And so that changed.
Yeah.
So,
So did you go in that morning?
Yeah, I think it was just regular start time for us, which is my regular shift is 6:30 to 2:30.
Okay.
So just showing up at 6:30 and just kind of then they give us what we need to do that day.
Huh. So was it quiet when you got there at 6:30?
Normally it's quiet at 6:30. Yeah. Normally not many people are up.
Right.
And then once you kind of started venturing outside, like later in the day, you could see there's a lot of people, but we're often around a lot of people.
Yeah. It was an event. People are going to be there for the event.
Exactly. And so, we didn't. All right, there's a lot of people. They're, a little fiery. All right, we're around protests all the time. It's not anything new for us. And so, we just kind of did our job.
Yeah. Was there a point in the day or like a particular thing that happened? Or maybe it didn't, maybe it wasn't until after, but was there a point where you thought something is different here? This isn't normal.
Yeah. So, definitely. But when I was posted on Constitution Avenue, which is the hill that you see if you're looking at the Capitol from the Washington Monument on the left-hand side.
Okay.
And so I was posted almost all the way up the hill. So you can kind of see the mall.
Okay.
From there. And so we could see a group of people coming.
Okay.
But again, we were used to dealing with, big groups of people.
Yeah.
And so, there's a fence line, of bike racks, like at the end of, I think they were at the end of like a Peace Circle area. And so we can hear on the radio stuff starts breaking bad over there. Okay. All right. We'll see kind of what happens. And, it wasn't until they kind of got onto the Capitol grounds itself, onto the podium, the inauguration stand, that things kind of started to change. And then myself and others responded over to kind of start to assist and figure out kind of how we can help. I would respond over to the bottom of the same side, Northwest Drive is what we call it. And the group started kind of moving. This is when the group starts moving around the Capitol building. And then myself and two others kind of posted up we call it north door of the Capitol building, at the bottom of the ramp there. And then
was it at that point? Was it still kind of normal, or was this like kind of unusual that you guys had to maneuver and post at different spots and all that kind of stuff?
Very different at that point.
Okay,
things had definitely changed.
Okay, yeah, because you're reacting to like movement that probably wasn't supposed to be happening.
Yeah,
not in terms of like an individual doing something, but just where people were going. At this point, they're already in places like, okay, this isn't normal.
Yeah, I mean, once I crossed over Constitution Avenue onto like the Capitol grounds itself, me and my other squad mates were telling people to turn around and go back.
Yeah.
And the group was so large, and they just were ignoring
our
command.
Did anybody listen? Or
no.
was it?
No.
So they were just like, nobody's
so
really...
they just rushed past us, and we're just trying to stay together at that point.
Right.
Not to get, anything happen to any of us.
Yeah. Surrounded by a big group like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was at the top of the group slowly comes around up the hill, and, we're giving them commands and, hey, turn around, go back. They're not listening to us. And they're just going over, obstacles that should slow them down or stop them. And at that point, that's when we know that the game's changing. Yeah. And we have to adapt and figure out what we're going to do to stay safe and keep each other safe. Right. Yeah.
Was it at that point, like, did you hit a point where you like felt danger? Like, okay, I could actually, something bad could happen here, like in terms of physical danger to you or to somebody you were working beside? And was that point, or was it a different point that happened?
For me, not to say I felt safe, but relatively safe. Yeah. At that point, I think the people, for me, I was always on the outside of the building. And so I didn't experience a lot. Now I had, and then really not much pushing and shoving with myself either. Yeah. Or the people I was with. A lot of verbal. It just at that point we weren't responding. We were just kind of holding our ground and just not responding, and doing our best to just prevent any more disturbances in the area that we were at. Eventually, the crowd started to get rowdy around us, and we had to move. We just didn't. Okay. It was just there's just three of us there. Yeah. And so it's three versus however many. Yeah. But I didn't personally feel any danger. There were a lot of people that I thought, with the verbal confrontations that they were having, because literally you'd have one person come up to you and say a negative thing, and the next person would be positive.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was very interesting
disorienting,
day.
I would think, especially with, like you were talking before about learning to pivot and deal with different kinds of people, and then you're like literally pivoting, right? One person and the next person maybe is acting a little differently, so the crowd itself would be hard to assess, I guess.
Yeah, very much so. And then, sometimes they would argue with each other. They'd be, and I'm like, all right, well, let's not get in a fight here, because then I have to do something. Now I have to possibly engage depending on what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so luckily nothing happened. But yeah, so I was on the outside of the building most of the day. I went inside later when they called for everyone. But you could really hear from the radio how bad things were.
So on your radio, is it kind of like you can hear everything from all the different Capitol Hill police officers that are kind of engaged with everything at that point?
Yeah. I mean, you can hear once they kind of started pushing, we call it FRU, but the people that protect the outside of the Capitol, once they're pushed off of their posts, because now they have control. And so, once we knew they kind of had one side of the building, and start to make entry into the building, that's kind of when, all right, now what's going to happen? This is new to everyone. This is unknown territory. Yeah. So
did you see people kind of in the area you were engaged with that were threatening at all, or like that had like weapons or anything that could, you see some of these guys seemed like they had staffs that were flagpoles, but not necessarily a flagpole, or I don't know, did you see anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the crowd was coming up Northwest Drive, one of my coworkers was like a pitchfork,
flat out pitchfork.
Yeah, in a normal situation, that's not going to happen. We'd have to do something about that, but we couldn't do anything.
So there's a dude kind of coming at you.
He didn't come at us.
But there's a guy in this.
He just has a pitchfork on his shoulder.
Got a pitchfork.
Yeah, just walking around, which is not normal, would not allowed to happen.
What would, like, if there was a totally calm situation, like 4th of July, and a dude was walking around with a pitchfork, how might you deal with that? I mean, I know it depends a lot, right?
Yeah.
If you just said, hey, you can't have that, he's like, I'll put it in my car. Or like, I don't know. What would you do with a guy, like if he refused he has his pitchfork?
Yeah, I mean, that's a possibly deadly force situation.
Right.
And so.
Right, that's how you would, like in a calm, like 4th of July, and there's a dude, that's how you would first assess this is a possible.
Yeah,
right?
because he could kill someone with that. So
Right.
then now I have to.
So now you put that in this.
Threat level has to match my level of force.
Right. So that's one guy. But then you put that in this other setting where things are just going sideways.
Yeah.
And it's a whole different trying to evaluate all those things.
Yeah. There's nothing we could have done. Hey, come here, guy. Let's talk. And so, no, it's just, hey, watch out.
Right.
Keep your eyes aware of where he's at and where you are.
Right. And your other two.
Yeah. My other two coworkers,
aware as well at that
and so
point.
just kind of pointing those things out. Once we were by North Thor, we saw all sorts of things go by, shields and all sorts of things kind of come by.
What do you mean come by?
So
just people walking around.
We were just kind of protecting where we were at.
Yeah.
People would pass in front of us to go around to the back, around to the front. We were just kind of holding our ground and keeping each other safe at that point.
Yeah.
We didn't move till later, but even still, you could see the crowd out there. We ended up posting kind of on the east front we call it Senate Door, and so that was on the flat area that you see on pictures. That's the east front, and so that was calmer. Most of the action was on the west front. It was on the back side. Okay, well, not really the back side, but the west front side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So during the events of the day. Did you hit a point where you realized during that day? I'm sure afterwards it's definitely happened, but where you thought this is a historical day in a different sense, even than what you've already talked about. Like this is beyond those other things.
Yeah, definitely. Once people are running out of the Capitol building, like the police are chasing you out of the Capitol building, that's right. Things have changed, and so. Wow. I didn't go inside until later in the early evening, afternoon, and I just saw the building was just a mess. It was destroyed.
Yeah. And at that point, you definitely know.
Yeah, it's because I had worked in the Capitol building previously. I'd worked in the visitor center, and so you get to see all the rotunda, things like that, different places, the crypt, and you get to see how beautiful it is. I mean, it's a historical building. It's very well preserved, but that day was just trash. Yeah. And so that was the day that, or that was the time I was like, wow, this, is really, for me, it was a sad day. Yeah. And then also to see all the officers inside, huddled over, some of them bloodied, things like that.
Not something you ever expected to see.
Not something I ever thought I'd see. Yeah. I mean, one point, I got pepper sprayed and we run inside. And the bathroom that we were going into was just full of officers just wiping pepper spray off themselves. Yeah. Water's on the floor everywhere, things like that. Things I never thought, that normally it's just a senator or a member walking in, using the restroom, walking out, know. But just, that day it was a totally different circumstance.
Yeah. I mean, getting pepper sprayed is getting attacked. Yeah. That's not stuff you play around with. Yeah. So, wow. When did you feel like, maybe it wasn't even that day, but I don't know. When did you start to feel like things were starting to get some semblance of control back?
When we were finally relieved from work. Really? Which wasn't till the National Guard got there.
Yeah, because these things are happening, and you're one individual amongst many police officers. Yeah. You're dealing with what's right in front of you. Yeah. And of course, for all of us, later, we're looking back on the events and know how long it lasted. But in that time, I guess you still don't really know. Is this the end? Are we done? What's going to happen in the next couple hours? What's going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah, so when I went inside, they called for everyone to go to where you see the officer's head getting smashed in the door. Yeah. I think Officer Smith is his name. We started to push out that door. I was at the back of the stack. We started to push out the door. And so that was kind of the end. They started to push people off of the stand. Mm-hmm. And so I did get to kind of see the end of everything. Yeah. we're getting reinforcements for other departments. Their hard squad is coming to help us, back us up. So I did kind of get to see the end of the mayhem that was going. I had no idea what happened at that door.
Yeah. Which is a whole nother level.
Which is a whole nother level. I had no idea. I saw a little bit when I got there. People were still throwing things in. Yeah. Different poles and different things like that. But I had
launching stuff from the crowd.
Oh basically? Yeah, that stuff was still coming in, but I had no idea the level of violence that had gone down.
Right.
There that day.
But so, I mean, I know there's a lot of things going on, but I don't know. You mentioned a few things. I'm just trying to picture this, right? So literally, as they're kind of clearing up, but people are still just like launching stuff at you.
Yeah, people are still holding. I mean, I saw one lady holding onto the stand.
Yeah.
Like not wanting to let go.
Right.
Well, she's gonna get arrested now, anyways. Right. But just things like that.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so once we push out the door, it's called Lower West Terrace door. Once we push out that door, the whole stand. This is where the president comes out for his inauguration.
Yep.
Covered with all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so that's normally just plain white.
Right.
It's a white stage.
Yeah.
And so it's got pepper spray. It's probably got blood. It's probably all sorts of different things on there. And so, I definitely know like, wow, this is going to have to be redone.
Yeah.
But
somebody have to clean this up.
Exactly. They have a long night ahead of them. But yeah, so that was for me. I was able to see that, the end of it, and then saw the crowd kind of get behind these other agencies that came to support us that day. So I did kind of get to see, okay, all right, most of this is over for us as Capitol Police officers.
Yeah.
And so at that point, all right, now what do we do, right? Are we going to go home? Are we going to have to come back to work tomorrow? And then once I actually got to that door, someone just asked me this question the other day. I was like, I didn't even check my phone all day.
Yeah.
And I finally, once I had a moment, I saw someone else take out their phone. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot.
You probably had a few messages.
I had a lot, yeah. And so
I think I might have messaged you.
I think
that
you did,
day,
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh yeah. So I finally took out my phone. This was probably like 6 o'clock or so.
Yeah.
And this has been going, I hadn't even thought about it.
Right.
And so, all these messages.
That had to be a moment.
That was, yeah. My wife's called me 17 times.
Yeah, I'll bet she did.
And then, I got a bunch of text messages.
So you hadn't been able to talk?
No.
I mean, I wouldn't think in the middle of that, but she really has no idea. I mean, she's seeing, I mean, I remember, everybody I'm sure remembers that day, but I remember seeing what was going on. And you're the first person I thought of. Yeah. And then, of course, your wife was the second person I thought of. And I was wondering if she had any idea throughout that day what was going on with you.
Yeah, I don't think we're not big news people.
Right.
And so she didn't really know what was going on, I don't think, or the severity of it.
Probably good.
Yeah, I think so. I agree.
But eventually, I texted her. I'm sure other people texted her. And then she's like, well, all these people were texting me. Something's got to be going on.
Yeah. So I think she kind of probably pulled up and figured out kind of what was going on.
Yeah.
And then, called me a bunch of times. And, I didn't realize until later that day to really pick up my phone. And then I started, messaging people back. All right, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good.
We'll just be able to send out a blast to everybody.
Yeah.
Like, hey, everybody. One message.
Exactly. Yeah. And
take a little while.
Yeah. So that was kind of, like you said, it was kind of a wake up call for me. Like I've been in this all day.
Yeah.
I forgot about just the outside world.
Right. You'd be exhausted. Because the stress level would be pretty high for a pretty long period of time.
It wasn't until later that I really really kind of let it all go.
Yeah. Was that like when you got home that night? Or did you go home that night, or how'd that work?
Did I go home? I forgot.
Yeah.
I don't even know. But it wasn't even until later. Like we had to go back. Some people had to we call it decon, but get all the pepper spray and stuff off them. And some people had so much. I've talked to other officers that they had so much on them that it reactivated once they took a shower.
Ooh.
Which isn't fun.
Yikes.
And so, I think I went home that night. And then came back the next day and all right, what's the plan?
Right. And did you know by the end of that night, all your, I'm sure just with police officers, just like with other places you go to work, you have people you're closer to and people you don't know as well. Did you know all the people that you're close to were okay at that point? It was kind of known that, I mean, there were some. There was one, I think, fatality that day.
Yeah.
Of a police officer, and then of course a lot of injuries. Did you know were any of your friends on the force injured, or did you know at that point everybody was good, or what was the status?
Yeah. So the nice part about it was those COVID groups had broken us into groups of 10.
Okay.
And so my group of 10, everyone was okay.
Yeah.
In my group of 10. And then we were getting updates. One of my group, the guys in my group he's high up in the union. And so he was getting updates about Officer Sicknick, who ended up passing.
Right.
And so he was kind of relaying those to us as to what was going on with him.
That had to be a pretty sobering moment, I would think.
Yeah. You know, I didn't know any of that really was going on until, you know, I'm getting these text messages. And so, so that was a sad moment as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll eventually talk about maybe kind of the aftermath and some things along those lines, but just, you know, for that day in and of itself, you know, for people like me, of course, are seeing things through the lens of the media, right? And now the hearings and things like that. So we're hearing a lot of things, but what I thought it would be really great to talk to you is just a personal story, right? So it's just about you, person, but you were there, you were on the job. And so I don't know, is there something you'd want to tell people that aren't police officers, that are just your average person, that would be something, I don't know, something you just want to let everybody know about?
Yeah, something that when you mentioned this question, something that makes me think of, like, freedom isn't free.
Yeah.
And it comes at a cost. And we're lucky to have it here in America.
Right.
Because you think of, you know, I've played this game in my head. Right, what if this were to happen in another country? What would that look like, right?
Yeah.
It would not look like what would have happened here. I don't, you know.
Yeah.
Probably, you know, we always said this, and I heard this by Officer Goodman. It could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
And in other countries, my assumption is, depending on the country, it would be a lot worse.
Yeah.
And so we're lucky to have the freedom to be able to protest and be able to do these things, and, you know, we're given those First Amendment rights. And, you know, I just think of freedom. That's what I think of. Freedom was saved that day by brave officers that stood and held the line.
Yep, of which you were one.
Of which I was one. But that's what I think of. Freedom comes at a cost. We often sign, you know, the military guys, they put their lives on the line every day as well. That's just a day. For me, it's just kind of a watermark for America. And, hey, remember this day, right?
Yeah.
And kind of learn and going forward.
Yeah, I think for me, watching some of the hearings, probably the first day of the hearings was, I got a little bit of the sense of what you just said there, the historical nature of what could have been versus what was, which was terrible enough, but that, you know, you and other officers protected our election that day. I mean, that's not hyperbole. You know, it's like that actually happened.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think it was necessary, but also thankful, you know, we had people there to hold the line and to protect us. So, yeah, appreciate that, man.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned that, one thing I just put this mention to someone else's. So after all this is done, we're getting ready to go. We have all these agencies here. Everyone's helping us out. They have to now do the electoral. They have to finalize the votes.
Yeah.
And so that was something we were like, can this wait for tomorrow? Right.
Right.
In our minds, we're like, we
Right.
just did this all day.
Sure.
But so they have to then sweep and clear the whole building. You know, all these canine dogs, all these bomb techs are all sweeping.
It's a big building.
So they had a lot of help to do that, to clear the building of, you know, who knows what anybody left behind.
You can't make assumptions.
Exactly.
You have to make no assumptions. And
so a lot of unscreened people went in the building that day.
Yeah.
And so, that had to be done. They still had to do what they came to do that day. And so oftentimes people forget that. Like, Congress still did their job that day as well.
Right.
But even though it was super long in the night.
Right.
But
they wouldn't have been able to do that if you guys didn't do what you did.
Yeah. That's true.
Men and women, not just guys.
Yes.
But yes. Yeah. Wow. So, eventually you got through that day.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I'm thankful, you know, that you got through it safely. I'm curious, you know, did things get back to normal? Being what some kind of, you know, your job is unique, being what normal was before this, or is there like a new normal now?
There's definitely a new normal.
Yeah.
Our awareness, I think, is heightened.
Yeah.
As far as, you know, the what ifs.
Right.
Right. I always think of, I don't know if you've ever seen World War Z, the
Yeah,
zombie movie.
I think so. Is that is it Brad Pitt?
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
super fast zombies?
Yeah. The rule of 10 that they talk about there when he goes to Israel and talks to, there's always one in this group of leaders that always goes down the rabbit trail.
Right.
Of what if. And I think my perception, this is just speaking for me, our perception has gotten better at that.
Okay.
The what if. Now, it's not necessarily fun
Right.
to be at the lower levels of that, because often that what if means now I have to stay late to work.
Right.
The what if scenarios.
Okay.
But I think that's something that we've improved at.
Right.
Just speaking from my
Yeah.
point of view.
So from your point of view, new normal means thinking through a lot more scenarios that previously probably would have been thought of as edge cases.
Yeah.
That
You
don't think about them necessarily until a little more circumstances pop up that would indicate that. Whereas now you could have no circumstances, but you're still going to be thinking about that possibility.
Yeah. And when your boots on the ground, we do think about those things.
Yeah.
But we don't have the authority to kind of make those changes and implement those things.
Gotcha.
And so we're just waiting on word from above to make those calls. And it's not necessarily fun hearing, hey, you have to stay late, you won't see your family tonight.
Yeah.
To keep the Capitol complex safe.
Right.
But if that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, getting past that day, I think for most of us who weren't serving like you were, and we're kind of doing our jobs, doing whatever we do in normal part of life. Once we were past January 6th, there were, of course, interesting things to hear about from my perspective, but I didn't think much about that. That wasn't the end of it, right? For you all, I don't think. After I thought through it a little bit more, and I just want to mention a couple things here, and then just ask you, what it was like for you dealing in the aftermath of things. But so, you mentioned, on January 7th, and if I get any of these dates wrong or anything, certainly feel free to correct me. I tried to do research and find these out. But on January 7th, Brian Sicknick suffered a stroke after being physically engaged with the protesters. And you mentioned him. So that was the day after January 6th. And then on January 9th, so a couple days later, Howard Liebengood, 15-year veteran of the Capitol Police, died by suicide on January 9th. And then after that, a little while after that, on April 2nd, Officer Billy Evans was struck and killed by a vehicle whose driver was attempting to breach a barricade at the Capitol. And so it wasn't like, the 6th happened, you come in the next day and everything's good to go. Like, there was I assume a lot of pain that people internalized and dealt with differently depending on who they were and their life circumstances. I don't know, what do you want to say and describe about what it was like after that? Yeah,
so just for those three men, I didn't know Officer Sicknick really at all. I knew Howie very well, and that was a hard morning.
Yeah.
Having to hear about that. Actually came into work, and I had no idea. Most people didn't know. And one of his really good friends, Officer Stone, his locker's right next to mine, and so he had just found out and was just a mess on the floor. And I was trying to figure out what's wrong. What's and he wouldn't tell me. And then having to go hear about that from our upper management, that was a hard morning.
Yeah, sure.
Howie was an awesome guy, and is missed dearly. But he was an awesome guy. The morning with Officer Evans, that was, things had not necessarily settled down, but calmed down. That was in April, and I remember that because I was walking around the buildings, and I, hear stuff outside, and then the radio starts to go off, and shots fired, things like that. And then the radio starts to kind of the emergency, rushing him to the emergency room, things like that. So that was hard. It's like, okay, are we doing this again? Just another kind of wake up call. an unfortunate incident. But yeah, there's just, those were hard instances and 3 good men we lost.
Yeah. So, looking back on those things obviously are very impactful, but the whole thing, just how would, as you think back on these things, how has it impacted you? I guess first of all, you've touched on it a little bit, but how has it impacted you as a police officer? And then just personally, how has it impacted you?
Yeah, I think just within my job, it's really giving me a desire to learn and grow. And I see that as like, it was a learning experience. If we don't take anything from it, are we growing? Are we learning? Are we doing a good job?
Yep.
And for me, it's like, okay, is this kind of what I wanted to continue to do in my career? Or do I not?
Yeah.
And so just kind of a wake up call for me.
Yeah. An evaluation.
Yeah. And so,
and are you still in the process of that evaluation?
Yes, it's kind of an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it was like, okay, what can I do to add skills, whether that's law enforcement side or maybe another career as maybe an exit strategy.
Right.
And so we'll kind of see what doors open in that regard. But yeah, for me, it's just kind of a reminder, like, all right, while Capitol Hill is relatively safe, outside of maybe going into another part of DC, it still has its moments where you never know what's going to happen. And so, it was just kind of wake up call. Hey, do I want to be a police officer and retire as a police officer, or do I want to maybe change careers and try something else out?
Yeah.
And then, personally, it was, it's hard on the family. We were working 12-hour days for about the first quarter of the year. And so that was hard, just not being able to see my kids really for that time period, and hard on my wife as well, having to manage all the kids at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine the other, of course, you just mentioned it, but the other impact is there's an impact on you, the officer, but then all those families as well, right? And the families kind of thinking through what's going to happen to my spouse, this day or the next day, and there's probably, for them, there's a reevaluation of those things. And then you have to have those conversations, I would think, with your spouse about all those kinds of things that maybe, that they're a possibility, but they're a little more remote, perhaps, until something like this happens. And then it's like, well, it's a little more real, not real, but like possible, than what you maybe had thought before.
Yeah. I mean, the previous shooting to this was the baseball practice shooting, but that wasn't on the grounds.
Yeah.
There was a shooting in the visitor center right before I came on. But that was pretty quick and easy. That was just one person. The last kind of major instance that we kind of point to outside of September 11th was that affected the department was 1998, where a person came in and shot an officer and actually killed another agent as well during a gun battle. But that's a kind of another time in our moment. It's like, okay, 98, that was it.
Yeah.
And haven't had anything since then.
Yeah, Capitol Hill Police, I should have wrote it down. They've been around for a really long time.
1828.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But in that time, the place I'd read, if it was up to date, there were 7 police officers who were killed in that period. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it sounded about right. I know they just added one.
Yeah.
Gibson and Chestnut were in 98. They had a sergeant named Eney who died in a training accident.
Okay.
They just added one. His last name is Crenshaw, and I forgot the circumstances there. And a guy died a couple years ago due to a heart attack on duty.
Okay.
And then Sicknick and Evans. I think that might be 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you said 1828?
Yeah, 1828 is when they...
About 200 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not... That's one of the things I was thinking through, like, I'm not a police officer, so I have no idea, but all I can do is guess, if you work certain neighborhoods in Chicago, I would assume, the thought of being shot at or being in a situation is probably a lot more prevalent than other situations, right? And so for you guys, like, that's not going to be a super common scenario. No. But now, it's definitely, I would think, more front and center than what it would have been.
Yeah, and even just the violence. I mean, you see on the news all the time, just the violence in general.
Yeah.
Is up.
Yeah.
Whether that's Black Lives Matter protests or January 6th
Yeah.
or pro-abortion or pro-choice. I'm sorry, pro-choice or pro-abortion.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, pro-choice or pro-life.
Yeah.
Just the violence between those groups tends to be higher than I think when I first came on.
Oh, really?
So I came on in 2014, and I remember when I was in academy, it was the first kind of summer of kind of, I don't know if Black Lives Matter had started at that point, but it was the Michael Brown shooting in Ferguson. And so that happened when I was in academy, and so that's kind of always been there,
right?
As I've been on the department. But prior to that, like, that stuff it wasn't as bad.
Yeah.
And I'd say most police agencies in the summertime, there's more protests, just because people are out of school. You can stay out late in protests, and it's not super cold.
Yeah.
And so protests are normally always up in the summertime.
Right.
And normally happen during the summertime because of the conditions.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of always specifically been there with that because of when I started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thinking through dealing with that so again, going back to that, like a Chicago police officer thinking through going to work every day, what the danger level is and the kind of danger. Again, it's a different category. So I'm not trying to say it's more or less, but that's one thing. But then coming to work and going, well, the danger, it could come from an individual, but also it could come from a group of 100,000 people or 10,000 people, or that's a whole different kind of thing to think through and evaluate and work through with your workmates.
Yeah. We were kind of always playing scenarios in our mind of what could happen.
Yeah.
Possibly. Yeah, you have the lone wolf kind of scenario that you talked about, which
Yep.
one guy comes up and does whatever he wants to do, and or you have like a large crowd
just gets worked up. Or
yeah.
whatever.
And I've heard different examples of a story that I've heard of. Hey, even if we had every agency in the capital region, national capital region, every officer 3 deep, the crowd still would have, possibly pushed us all. All right. Again, it's one of those what ifs. Who knows?
Yeah.
Kind of speculative things.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely being on Capitol Hill is safer than kind of like you said, those, Chicago guys and things like that. Yeah.
Yep. So, I think we talked about this a little bit and just discussing whether we're going to do the interview and how it might go. But one of the things I think I had mentioned, and of course it crossed your mind, that you were involved in a truly historical event. So I would be surprised if this didn't happen. This is going to happen. Your kids are going to be taught about this event, and when they learn about history. And you're going to, you'll hear, Dad, were you there for that? And have you thought about how you're going to tell your kids what happened that day?
No, and it's really interesting, even telling them about my job now.
Right.
They're so young that they don't really understand what I do.
Yeah.
They just know I'm a police officer every time. Every once in a while, I'll wear my uniform home, and they'll kind of see, oh, he actually is a real police officer. He's just not making it up.
Yeah.
And things like that. And so they really don't know yet or have an idea, but just I feel like it's. And I'm not a veteran, but from my understanding of people that were on war, just kind of telling what happened to you, telling their story, and saying, hey, this is kind of what happened, and this is where I was at, this is what I was doing, these people I was with. Eventually, I'm sure that time will come, but
it will. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll come at different points in their life.
Yeah,
because you get to certain awareness when you're, a teenager as opposed to like a young adult.
Yeah,
and just those kinds of things will hit you in different ways.
Yeah.
And to have your dad be intimately involved with that, I would think the questions would come again from different angles. So prepare yourself.
Yeah, right now they just know I work in Washington D.C.
Right.
That's pretty much about the extent that they know. Hey,
Yeah.
Dad, he goes to work. Oh, that's where you work, Washington D.C., where the Nationals play baseball.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
yeah,
that's probably good.
Yeah.
Keep it simple.
Exactly.
Right?
Oh yeah, that's all we're doing right now.
Yeah. So moving forward for you, I don't know if this might be a simple thing, maybe it's not, but how would you say you are moving forward from those events. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it was kind of one of those points I'd mark in my life and say, okay, this is kind of a launching point forward. What did I learn? What did I take away?
Yeah.
It was for me about growth. You know, I feel like that point I was kind of stagnant, I think, in my career.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really kind of a wake up call. And I mentioned earlier, like, hey, do I want to keep doing this?
Right.
You know, okay. And if I don't, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
How do I get there?
Right.
Those are kind of the 3 steps that I feel like or 3 questions I kind of ask myself.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're kind of executing a plan at this point, or like navigating?
Yeah, kind of navigating, and it's nice to be able to navigate when I have a job. Well, I still have a job.
Sure. It's a little different.
It's a little different.
Yeah,
They're like, okay, I need to get a job today.
Yeah, right.
And so it does give me time.
Yeah.
To be able to kind of execute those goals and kind of figure that out and kind of, you know, test some things out. Okay, then maybe that didn't work, or maybe I don't like that so much.
Yeah.
And kind of pursue some different avenues, options. Yeah, I guess my 2 things have just been learning and growing.
Yeah.
And taking that in, and if that takes time, I got time.
Yeah.
So
are there specific things you're looking into, you want to talk about at all, or are you just still kind of like evaluating that in the background?
Just still kind of evaluating.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, so I didn't have social media before this.
Right.
And I hopped onto LinkedIn as kind of a job search, job evaluation, and that's really kind of opened my eyes to kind of what's out there, and also the skills it takes to get to those places, and things like that. And so that's really opened my eyes, and seeing just the opportunities that are abounding,
right.
But also the need for me to kind of build up my own skills to kind of get to those places.
Yeah.
Whether that's sooner rather than later, or whether that's down the road. But yeah, that's really opened my eyes.
Yeah. So what's it been like? This has to be kind of strange. I don't know. Maybe it's not. But I was thinking about this. You know, this is a historical event, right? Like, it's significant. We've talked about that from that perspective, that literally your grandchildren are definitely going to hear about this event and learn about it. Yet it's still right now impacting the news cycle. And I assume, kind of based on what you had talked about early on, you're seeing the media and how they interact, and with the hearings and things like that. What's it like being part of something that is definitely going to, like, no doubt going to be taught to the kids in terms of something historical that happened, but still an ongoing, unfolding thing, and you're there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't think of it that way. But
I really don't.
Yeah.
Because,
I guess you don't. You probably shouldn't be thinking about it that way, I guess.
Yeah. And it gets talked about so much that it's kind of like, okay,
right.
Another 6th thing, kind of put out my mind.
Right.
You don't know really, you weren't really there. That can happen sometimes. You weren't really there.
Yeah.
You don't really know what happened.
Yeah.
Now with these hearings, I don't really watch the news.
Yeah. Probably a healthy approach in
Yeah.
general.
I always say, if I want to, we say this at work often, if we want to watch the news, just step outside the break room, right? Like in the hallway.
Yeah.
And then there's your news right there.
Yeah.
And so, I think, I don't really think about it.
Yeah.
I guess for me, it also being a negative event, I'd prefer to think about the positive events that
Well,
I've had.
that makes sense. Yeah.
And so, I don't really think about it too much.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, obviously I understand what you're saying. It was a
Yeah.
negative event, but it was also, in a sense, that you were there, you were defending our government continuing to work. In that sense, it was a positive event, right? But obviously the bigger picture wasn't a great thing. So has anything changed? I was curious, I was thinking about this, with members of Congress since the event, with you, and how you might not, but I don't know how you interact with them, or you notice anything different with them, not individuals, but just in general.
Yeah, I mean, of course, after that, everyone's, thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I mean, I wouldn't know. That's what I was asking. Like,
yeah.
You never know. People could just not say that, right? But there was recognition.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you show up and,
So let me just say too, like, we
Yeah.
see with the cameras, there's recognition.
Yeah.
But then you wonder, we don't know these people. Is there like a personal, hey, I'm looking at you, Jared, thanks, man, or however they would say, you know, does any of that kind of stuff happen?
It depends on the person.
Sure.
And so, you get different reactions, and this is how politics work.
Right.
You get different reactions from different sides.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but most people were thankful, even including staffers, because some of them were stuck in there, in their office buildings. And so, just, shortly after that, thank you. We're sorry what happened. Thank you for being here. Definitely recognition, from everyone. And even now that people because we just started opening up to the public again, the buildings in the Capitol. And so even people that are just now coming for the first time, this is where, this took place at, oh, thank you, and so we're still getting some of that now.
That's the thing I was curious about, just the public in general. I mean, I would assume that's going to be the unique exchange that you'll hear sometimes, like, oh, this is where this happened. Yeah. But beyond that, is the demeanor just, it's still, there's tourists doing the tourist thing. Anything different about them, is it, that you would see?
Not really. Yeah. Now, I don't work at the Capitol building itself, and that could change things. Yeah. Those officers that are over there working, there might be more of that there. Yeah. But one thing with Congress, it just goes. Right. And so, to a degree they've moved on, to a degree they haven't. And so, you never know what the reception's going to be. Right. But yeah.
So what about for you, just being, like, what does it mean for you? And maybe this hasn't changed, from the time you first started being a police officer, but what does it mean to just, big picture, why do you do what you do? What does it mean to be a police officer? Why are you doing it? Yeah. I'm sure you're doing it. Well, I don't know. Yeah. Just open that question up. What does it mean to you?
Yeah. That's a good question. It just means, I think I talked about it briefly earlier, but just that freedom aspect. Yeah. I think freedom, and for me, I'm a kind of a history guy, and so I enjoy the history aspect. Okay.
Okay. Well, that's a great place to be. If you're into history. Yeah.
So. And I remember just standing in the rotunda and just like, hey, this is crazy things have happened here in this rotunda. Yeah. Things that are in pictures, in history books and things like that. And so, I'm just there, like, making sure all the tourists are fine. But you walk in, and so you walk in we call it Statuary Hall, but you walk over there, and that's the old House of Representatives office. And it's like, this is where, Jefferson and those guys were meeting. Yeah. And you get to, stand on the marble floor, where these guys were. And so I really enjoy that part of it. Cool. And that's why I enjoyed being in the Capitol building itself, because you get to see some, and even underneath, like where tourists aren't allowed, the hallways and the basement levels, and you get, how old is the brick down there? It's like that brick has seen some really cool things, some really cool people walk by. And so you got to think about former presidents, were members of Congress. And so former presidents were, walking down here, eating lunch in these cafeterias. It's just crazy things to think about that you don't get in a regular, I'd say, cop job. Yeah.
I get that. So, like, I've had experiences, I think, like what you were describing, and my wife always just looks at me kind of strangely because she does not experience these things this way. But, like, literally, like, if we go to a historical site and they say, this is the original street that was here, like the cobblestones, I think that's the coolest thing.
Oh,
like, my feet are touching the stones that, this other guy, whatever the history is of that time. We went to Europe one time and we're doing some tours of some churches, and one of the places there were some like original columns, and so I was like, I'm touching the stone, right?
Yeah.
And Shannon, she would just kind of be like, okay, that's cool. That's great. I'm glad you're enjoying touching that stone at somebody else. Yeah. But then on the opposite side, if I found out, like, if we were in one of these places and I found out that this was just rebuilt to look like it, I was like, well, what? I don't even want to touch, what's the big deal about that? Yeah. That's, So I think I get what you're saying. Yeah. It's pretty neat to think that, history, these guys were walking in these
Yeah.
halls or on this, this stone or
Yeah.
in this place. So.
Yeah. Even during the election season, people always ask me, especially presidential election, because a lot of senators then become, run for president. So like Vice President Harris, like she was a senator for a decent amount of time. And so, everyone asks, hey, what was she like? Was she nice? Was she mean? I'm like, it's just cool to see kind of people move up or, be able to tell that side of history too. And we always talk amongst ourselves at work of one of us should write a book, right? Like about, the different experiences and the stories that we have.
I'm surprised that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Once somebody retires, I mean, I'm sure there's certain things you can't say, but
Yeah.
I would think there'd be a lot you could. But
And so, we all have a lot of cool stories like that, especially guys that work there for a long time and members of Congress that are there for a long time. Definitely, they build a rapport.
Sure.
First name basis, things like that, that most people don't have.
Right.
Guys that are there for 20, 30 years in the same spot, they build a rapport, with these members of Congress that have been there for a long time. And so that's kind of a cool, different relationship that, most people don't have. With high-ranking members.
Right.
I remember when the National Guard guys were there, talking to them, they're from all over the place. And we're used to dealing with, generals, admirals, 4 stars, 3 stars. And they're like, the highest people we ever talked to was like a colonel, which I don't know where that is in the pecking order, but I'm like, oh, okay. That's the general's no big deal. Like the general's coming. I'm like, okay, it's just the general.
Right.
But for them, that's like a really, really, really big deal.
Yeah.
And so it's just kind of a reminder for me of wow, this is a really special place.
Yeah. Rubbing elbows with some people.
Yeah.
I mean, literally as high as you can go,
Yeah.
right? Within our government. So, yeah. And that's a normal day for you.
Yeah. And
that's pretty wild.
Yeah. It was just a reminder of oh wow, I guess I do get to do some really cool things. Now, to be fair for them, it's like their boss, so,
sure.
So it's a little different, But it's just a good reminder.
So you said that was, I think you said 8 years ago. You've been a police officer for 8.
Yeah, I started in September of 14.
Okay, right. And was that job what brought you to Frederick, or how'd you end up in Frederick?
Yeah, so I think we had looked. No, we didn't move to Frederick until the fall of 15.
Okay.
So I had been with Capitol Police for a little bit. And
Yeah.
It was looking like it was going to be a long-term thing.
Yeah.
And so we're like, all right, we need to buy a house.
Right.
And so I'm originally from Virginia.
Okay.
In Northern Virginia, and then my wife's originally from Baltimore County.
Okay.
So this is kind of like a middle ground.
Yeah.
We want a little more space, so we have a little bit, property.
Yep.
And so we also like to be outdoors.
Okay.
And so the hiking and things like that. And so.
You got any favorite spots you like to go to hike or do stuff outside?
I'm trying to think, where do we like visiting in the libraries. So I enjoy that about Frederick.
Yeah.
I feel like all their libraries are unique.
Yeah.
And
some of them are really beautiful.
And they're really pretty.
Yeah.
Even the ones they've redone.
Yeah.
I think are really pretty. And so we like that. I think our favorite park, I'd say, is Utica.
I don't think I've been there.
On 15.
Okay.
They just kind of built that.
Yeah.
And so I'd say that's probably our favorite park to go to. We like going to Cunningham Falls for the beach and Greenbrier for the lake, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of favorite hikes. We like going to the watershed.
Yeah.
I know that's your favorite spot.
That's my favorite spot. Yeah. Oh, you heard that. Huh?
And so, that's probably, we like Baker Park.
Okay.
Just getting everyone down to Baker Park is a lot harder than going to the library or.
But it's cool because there's a lot of wide open space.
Yes.
So you can kind of keep an eye on all the kids.
Yep. Go to the playground, those sorts of things, I think once the kids are older, it might be easier, be able to, everyone can walk downtown, those sorts of things.
I mean, to me, that's one of the awesome things about, there's a lot of really cool things about Frederick, but one of them, it's been interesting hearing you talk from the perspective of having younger kids. Obviously, my kids, are older, out of the house. So as you're saying that, through each phase of life, Frederick is still cool. Yes. And Frederick is really neat. I know, my daughter at one point, we realized I've been working downtown for 15 years, but we moved over this way from Smithsburg in 2015. And once we did, we realized our daughter was a little more interested in visiting because it was cool to go to Frederick.
Right.
You had the food. It's just a cool place to go. So it's nice to have, that for when your kids get older, it's still cool to go, go to Frederick.
Yeah.
And it seems like for any age, there's a lot of neat things going on. Baker Park, of course, is nice place to hang out too.
Yeah, I think because we looked for homes for a long time in a lot of different areas. Yeah. And we found that Frederick, like everything is kind of right here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're kind of by me, and everything's 10, 20 minutes away.
Yeah, it's great.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
And it seems like a very family-oriented town.
Yeah.
That was another thing that drew us to it. It's like, you kind of have those working professionals, but it's really, for me, like very much a family town. Yeah. Very family-oriented, which is like, all right, cool.
Yeah. But I know, we're out kind of in the similar direction, and I know you're seeing what I'm seeing. There's a lot of building going on.
Yeah. So that will change things a little bit.
Right.
It definitely.
But it's still, it's great.
Yeah. Even from when my oldest, he wasn't born in Frederick area, but like when we moved out here, I mean, it's changed dramatically in his lifespan.
Yes.
And he's just turned 8.
It's
like
he's 8 now.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so.
Wow.
Yeah. And just in that time frame, just the land that's kind of gone, and neighborhoods have gone up, and what it will look like, and so it's an exciting time to be here. I'm originally from Manassas, and Manassas had a similar transformation.
Okay.
And so it's interesting to kind of see that process on the adult side of things.
Yeah, sure.
Versus on the
different
kid
perspective.
Side. Different perspective.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like, okay, my home value's going up.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Different type of neighbor now.
Yeah. Yep.
And so it is definitely interesting being on the adult side of things versus the kid side. And just like, there's a lot of new stuff. This is a nice neighborhood. You know, does it have a playground, a pool? Those sorts of questions. So yeah.
Well, definitely glad you moved here.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for giving us your time and just your thoughts and sharing your experiences. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Yeah, it's been good.
Yeah.
All right. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope it gave you a new insight into the talents, passions, and curiosities from Frederick, Maryland, and beyond. If you did, maybe you can help me out a bit. The best way for the show to grow in its reach is for you, the audience, to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your friends. Much appreciated. Until next time.